What's up, guys? Welcome back to Fish Over Chicks Woodworking. My name is Peter, and today we are making this really cool brick pattern cutting board. I'm super happy with the way it came out. This was my first time making this pattern, and I think it came out really good. I used maple and walnut, and yeah, I love the way it came out, and it was not that hard to make. So stick around, and I'll show you how to do it. So the first thing I'm doing here is just getting the lumber ready. So I'm just kind of down with the miter saw, then I'm going to take it over to the planer and get it down to a working size. So I'm planing everything down to about 1 inch because that's how thick the cutting board will be in the end. Now we're going to head over to the table saw and get this walnut cut up. So right now I'm ripping it down to 3/16 of an inch. And then after I've done this for 8 pieces, we're going to head over to the miter sled and cut those up to 8.5 inches long. So your final cut size is going to be 8.5 inches long by 3/16 inches wide and 1 inch thick. And you're going to want 8 of those. Moving on to maple, I set the ripped fence about 1.25 inch away from the blade. So what I'm doing now is just ripping some longer pieces, and now I'm going to take them over to the table saw and get those cut down to 8.5 inches long. So you're going to need 8 of these. So in the end, you're going to want 8 maple pieces that are 8.5 inches long by 1.25 inch thick by 1 inch wide. And then I'm also going to do that with the walnut to get those down to 8.5 inches as well. Now I'm doing a dry run, just seeing what it's going to look like before the glue up with no glue, and then I move them over to the clamps, and I'm going to glue them up here. As you can see, I'm going every other, starting with walnut, so I'll go walnut, maple, and just gluing those together just like that. So I'm going to let that dry for about 2 hours, and during that drying process, I'm going to go back over to the table saw and start cutting up some more walnut. So I'm only going to need 6 pieces of this walnut, and these are going to be 11 inches long, again 3/16 inches wide, and 1 inch thick. So once you've let that dry for at least 2 hours, go ahead and take all your clamps off. So now you're going to go ahead and get all the excess glue off with your chisel there. Basically what I'm trying to do here is get everything off to make it a flat surface so it can run through the planer without clogging it up or without being wonky. And if you do not have a planer, that's okay. You're just going to have to do this step by hand with an orbital sander and just sand the heck out of it to make it flat. Thankfully, I do have a planer, so I'm just flattening it up here. Now we're going to take it over to the miter sled and just square up both sides so we have a perfectly rectangle cutting board to work with. So now onto the table saw. I've set my rip fence 1 inch away from the blade, and I'm going to run the board through this 7 times, so I'm going to have 7 1 inch by 11 inch pieces to work with after we're done cutting them all up. So now that I'm done cutting all those up, I'm going to take all my wood over and do a dry run here. As you can see, I'm putting those strips of walnut in between the strips of maple that I just cut, and that is what the board's going to look like. So now we're going to go ahead and do that with the glue. So just like you did before, you're gluing it up every other maple, walnut, but here you want to offset each maple piece a little bit so you can get that brick pattern. Clearly, I went a little bit overboard with the clamps, but hey, you can never have too many clamps, right? So now that this is all clamped up, we're going to let it sit for another 2 hours, or I'd say at least 2 hours. So that's what I did here. I think I let this one sit for about 3 hours, so now I'm just taking all the clamps off. And like we did with the last one, we're going to go ahead and take the chisel to it and get off any chunks of glue that we did not wipe off before. Starting to look really good now. And now we're going to square it up at the miter sled again. That's where you're really going to see what the finished product's going to look like. Obviously very cool, definitely looking good. So now either sand it or run it through the planer again. And then that is what's going to look like your final product pretty much. So let's take it to the router. I'm using a 1/8 inch round over bit because I really like the way that that looks on pretty much all my cutting boards. That's what I do for most of them. So 1/8 inch round over bit for that. And now it's time to sand. So you're going to sand the heck out of it. Start with a 120 grit and work your way up to a 220 grit. You're really going to want to just sand everywhere a ton here. There's no way around it, but you want it to be soft, so you got to sand a ton, especially with the 220 grit. Once you're done sanding to 220, go ahead and grab a wet cloth and just coat the whole board with water, and what that's going to do is water pop it and allow it to be sanded again. So then you're going to go ahead, sand it again with a 220 grit, and then we can move on to this step, which is the mineral oil step. So I use Howard cutting board oil, and I'm just going ahead, I'm coating the entire thing there. As you can see, the grain is really starting to pop, looking great. So you're going to want to do this 2 more times after this. So I'm going to go ahead and let this sit for 20 minutes, then coat the entire thing again with that mineral oil, then let it sit another 20 minutes, and then coat it again with the mineral oil. Alright guys, that's going to do it for today's video. I think the finished product came out really, really nice and was not that hard to make. Yeah, so thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, subscribe. As always, comment down below any other videos you'd like us to make, and me and John will be happy to put those together for you. But until next time, thank you for watching.